You're listening to Energy Insiders, a weekly update on clean energy and climate policy with Renew Economy's editor Giles Parkinson and leading energy analyst David Leach. Energy Insiders is brought to you by Evergen, providing cutting-edge energy management software for battery optimisation, virtual power plants and distributed energy resources. And Pylon, helping solar installers and retailers design high-resolution solar proposals in minutes.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders program. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy, the website, and also founder and editor of the EV-focused The Driven website. And joining me, as usual, is ITK Principal David Leach. David.
Pleased to be here, Giles. And we've got a great guest from over the waters today, haven't we, talking about one of the world's biggest economies and how renewable energy or decarbonisation is proceeding there.
Yeah, it's often forgotten that California, part of the US, is actually the world's fourth biggest economy, which is quite something, and has a target of about 90% renewables or clean energy by 2035, which will probably be renewables because they're about to close sometime their last nuclear power generator, and 100% clean energy by 2045. And have made huge strides over the last 10 years. The chair of the California Energy Commission, which sort of sets policy in the state, David Hochschild, was in Australia this week, talking to federal and state energy ministers and attending Climate Week in Sydney, where I listened to him and thought it'd be a great idea to catch up on this podcast. And so we did. So let's have a listen to David, our discussion with David, and we'll get back after that with news of the week. David Hochschild, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast.
Good to be here.
Yeah, and welcome to Australia, and I hope you're enjoying your trip. I heard your speech, and you're on the panel session at Climate Week in Sydney earlier this week. I think the one thing that really struck me was your optimism. Obviously, California is the world's fourth biggest economy, but it is part of America. And you do seem to have the anti-crisis leases when it comes to renewables and climate. I mean, this is not even allowed to say the word climate now on official government websites and newsletters. Why the optimism?
Well, look, I think it may not be quite so well understood outside the United States, but the reality is that most of the power to advance a transition to clean energy in the United States still rests with the states. So states like California have the authority to set our own clean electricity targets. So we're one of about half the states in the U.S. that have adopted a goal to get to 100% clean energy. We're almost 70% clean energy on the grid today. Alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables. Fossil is alternative on our grid today. And we're doing a huge amount to change the game. We have more EV charging plugs in California than we have gasoline nozzles. We've seen new construction. We built about 120,000 new homes a year. 10 years ago, only 1% of those were all electric. We were still heavily heating with gas, and now 80% are all electric. And we have the authority to set rates, to do interconnection standards, net metering, state government research and development programs, state tax credits. There's a huge amount of power that states have, and we are using that. And so I think the main point, I'm trying to give during my week here in Sydney is that what's happening now with the Trump administration is a temporary departure from the long-term goal. And I think a really good way to see the Trump administration is to understand it like a sort of political version of COVID that's come in and hit everybody really hard, had huge impacts, but we made it through COVID and we're going to make it through this. Donald Trump is turning 80 years old in a few months. The country has really turned against him. I think our collective resolve to build a clean energy future, remains really, really strong at the state level in the U.S.
Yeah. So we read about a lot of the issues with offshore wind farms and, for instance, permits being withdrawn and court battles happening. Is that California's not affected by that?
Yeah, so that's a really good example. Okay, there was 5 offshore wind projects in construction in the East Coast of the United States, and he issued stop work orders to these projects, some of which were like 95% complete. And by the way, any industry of any kind, I think is concerned to see that kind of disruption. Well, we still have a functioning court system in the United States. All those projects took the Trump administration to court and they won. And now all 5 of those projects are back in construction and going to get finished this year. And so we're still moving forward. Now, it's still bad. Okay, it raises costs. It is a painful thing to go through. In California, what we're doing, we're not going to be putting steel in the water during the Trump administration, but we are making massive investments in ports. We just approved $475 million for port upgrades for offshore wind in California. We're doing transmission. I just invested $46 million of our research and development funds to support offshore wind research, things like synthetic mooring lines and other things to drive the cost down. So we're still moving forward, but you have to be strategic about when you take on what part of the work.
Just before I allow David to let's just sort of rewind just slightly. Just explain exactly your role as commissioner or chairman of the California Energy Commission. I mean, I understand it's a policymaker, but I mean, you've got a very strong governor who's been an advocate for clean energy, as many of your governors there. So what is it that you guys actually do?
So the California Energy Commission is California's primary energy and policy and planning agency. We have about 1,000 people, and we do a pretty broad fruit cup of different energy-related activities. We set all the energy codes for new construction. So we're requiring solar on all new homes, all electric, high efficiency windows, LED lights. We fund about $150 million a year in research and development for cutting edge new clean technologies, better energy density for batteries and better solar and all the rest. We site all of the large scale power plants. So that power plant siting project. So right now we just started construction on the largest battery project in the world, $5.5 billion project in Fresno County. We support a lot around disadvantaged communities. We're doing, probably $165 million for tribal energy sovereignty, solar battery microgrids. We are deploying all the EV charging in the state. So we have more EV charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles. And a bunch of other, programs that we run: long duration energy storage, carbon capture, geothermal research. So pretty, and the whole goal is really to get the state to 100% clean energy future.
So, David, a couple of things I'd like to ask about, but maybe again, you could just say, what are the main policy mechanisms for achieving the governor's goal?
Yeah, so it's not one silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. There's many, many different policies, but the most important one, I think, is around the electric grid, and that is a law that requires us to get to 90% clean electricity on the grid by 2035 and 100% by 2045. We're absolutely on a path to do that. As I mentioned, we're about 70% clean energy on the grid today. And then we have a whole bunch of programs that are really...
Sorry, if I could just, excuse me to interrupt, and I just have a tendency to do it, but could you explain the mechanism by which you translate that policy into construction?
Well, we have, 3 investor-owned utilities, big, large-scale utilities, some of the largest in the United States, and then about 43 publicly owned utilities serving our population of 40 million people in California. A law got passed in 2018 called SB 100, which requires all of those utilities to procure 100% clean electricity by these certain dates, right? And is the sort of stair step up. They get fined. They pay a penalty if they fail to comply with that, okay? So we issue penalties if they fall behind. Every single utility in the state of California is in compliance today with these clean energy requirements.
And can you, sorry, just because this is interesting to me, of course, there's a consequence in terms of electricity prices. And I'm sure one of the complaints from someone who lives in, say, the ERCO region might be that electricity rates for business and for consumers are higher in California than they are in some other regions. What would you say about that?
Yeah, so there is a price increase in California. Why is that? That's from climate change. Okay, our rates were stable from 2000 to 2019, basically, and then we had the worst wildfires in the history of the state. So there's super expensive utility undergrounding going on. There's super expensive vegetation management and wildfire mitigation. That is the number one cost driver. If you look today in the electricity markets and you're trying to procure power, what's the cheapest? It's solar, and it's not close. Solar is cheaper than gas, cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than everything. And we're doing solar and storage. So the pipeline of new projects coming into California is predominantly solar and storage. And by the way, there's no fuel cost for renewable energy. That's a really important point.
No, we get that. We do.
Yeah,
We
I just want to say this. So the thing to be mindful of, particularly right now with what's going on in Iran with the war that Trump has initiated, fossil fuel prices are spiking. So actually, the best way to insulate ourselves long term from volatile fossil fuel markets is actually to transition.
David, I just wrote a long note about that. So I think everyone on this who listening in us here in Australia will be 100% behind that statement.
It's nice to have it reinforced though, because the general unfortunately in politics they don't always get it.
Now, another thing that sorry to ask these questions. Offshore wind's one thing, but behind the meter and rooftop solar, it's very clear that the United States generally, and California is no exception, has a cost of installing rooftop solar to the consumer that's, like at least 3 times what it is on a global average, and maybe 4 times what it is in Australia. Can you explain why that is, and do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah. So first of all, I really want to give credit to the progress Australia has made here. It's world leading progress on reducing the soft cost for solar installations. Today, in the nation of Australia, the majority of homes now have solar. That's an incredible milestone. And it's cheaper to install rooftop solar here by far than it is in the United States. And something I'm very jealous of, because you've made it so friction free. So your basic process here is, a customer can order solar and have it installed. And then when it's complete, you inform the utility. That is not how it works in California. There's all these permissions that have to be granted. You have to get approval, you got to get an inspection, and it has added a huge amount of cost. And so it's something I think Australia should take great pride in. And by the way, I just want to say one thing that's come up this trip for me very clearly. I don't think Australia takes enough pride in what you have done right on this stuff, because it's actually extraordinary. The fact you're going from 32% to 82% clean energy from 2022 to 2030. Amazing. It took you 10 years to build your first 6 gigawatt hours of batteries and only 8 months to build the second 6 gigawatt hours. And you've had 265,000 customer-owned home battery systems installed in the last 6 months. That's a rate 5 times faster than California. And I don't know. I just thought there'd be a little bit more like national pride about these achievements, because it's a really rapid electrification and decarbonization that's happening. And so, my feeling, I travel a lot. I do a lot of climate diplomacy around the world. As you mentioned, we're the 4th largest economy in the world, and we are really, especially during the Trump administration, invigorating our diplomacy. But in all of these places I go, there's always a two-way street. I mean, there's things that we're doing really well on, electric vehicles and charging infrastructure and large-scale energy storage, and things where we can do way better. And I love the exchange, and I think we should be, pushing to learn from each other. But I do want to just pay tribute to what Australia has done. I think the reason it's been harder in the United States and with California, it is seen as reducing safety. I think if you reduce the number of permits and inspections. And so that has been a real sticking point, and it's why it's been harder to kind of adopt the sort of friction-free system that you have here.
David, I come from a family of doctors and unions, and they always cite safety standards and as a reason, as a kind of trade barrier, if I can put it that way. I did some research on this, and I think United States is like the only country that has these particular fire hazard and safety standards. And even in Europe, it's incredibly, it's cheaper to install rooftop solar than it is in the United States, not as cheap as Australia. And I'm wondering what you can do as policy to actually cut through that, because it does seem something that consumers would embrace.
Right. We did just make a big step forward on this. We introduced a new program called Solar App, which lets the permit is still required, but rather than taking 60 days and being really expensive, now everybody can just do it online over the internet. And so that's reduced friction. That's for both behind the meter solar and behind the meter storage. So that's a step in the right direction. In terms of like getting to an architecture like you have here, where the solar installer has the full right to go ahead and just complete the system without a utility permission, that is really difficult to undo. And believe me, a lot of people have tried, and I think there's, people are going to continue to work on that, but that's been a tough nut to crack.
I'll hand back to Giles after this. The other thing I noticed when I was reading about this, and there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, is that I think California is looking at building a whole new city near a port or something with 70,000 people or something that has some kind of major electrification goal. I really didn't study it as closely as I should, but is that something you would want to talk about?
Yeah, there's a proposal in the northern part of the Bay Area for that, but I would say, pretty much all new communities now are going all electric. The cost of paying for the gas distribution infrastructure is too great, and the energy code requirements for new construction are really driving towards all electric. So that is not unique to that proposed community. That's really the norm now going forward, is doing all electric new construction, and in fact, as is retrofitting. So I just had my gas meter and my gas line removed from my house. I got induction electric cooktop, works great. And now we have just electricity serving all of our heating, space heating, water heating, and cooking needs, and it works great.
How are you managing the decline of the gas network? In Australia, there's great debate about how to manage that because they've invested assets, they're regulatory, they get regulated returns, and there's sort of so-called death spiral. Who should pay for the cutting off of gas connection?
Yeah, look, I think where we're at with climate change right now is that the low-hanging fruit has been picked. Okay, so everything we're doing is really hard. Okay, nothing is easy, and that's true not just of natural gas, but also with refineries. And so we're doing, we had 11 refineries in California. They have been one by one. Gasoline consumption in California is going down 1% every year. We're adding 1,200 electric vehicles a day in California. We have 2.5 million electric vehicles. So the need for refining is going down, but it's not ended. Obviously, we still use gasoline. And so there's a very delicate dance you have to do about keeping sufficient refinery capacity operating, even as you're transitioning to clean electricity. And the same is true for the gas network. And I think it's important to do it strategically. Ideally, you do it kind of community by community and proceed in ways that are really cost effective and where it's happening in a planned fashion. But it's hard. I don't want to just sugarcoat any of this. All of this is really, really hard, but it's necessary. And I'll just say, in California, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. We never had wildfire smoke my entire life. I'm 54. Okay, we never had wildfire smoke in the Bay Area until a few years ago. We've had some of the worst wildfires in history, and I know you've had in Australia as well. We had a day in the Bay Area a few years ago where the smoke was so thick in the middle of the day at noon that it was dark as night, and the street lights came on. Right. And my wife got sick, my kids got sick. We had to leave the Bay Area. The smoke was awful. And so this is not optional anymore to sort of ignore this or delay. I mean, we really see the transition as fundamental to confront climate change and also really economically strategic. And we are a state that does believe in innovation. 6 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are California companies. And so innovation has been good to our state. And so we look at these new industries that we want to scale, whether it's electric vehicles or batteries or solar, all the rest, and we see a lot of promise there.
I'd like to ask about the grid. Your targets, I think, are 90% clean energy by 2035 and it's 100% by 2045. You currently have, I think you've got one remaining nuclear power station, is a Diablo Canyon, which is what I think that's going to close sometime. Does that mean
Had
that?
its life extended, I think, just the other day.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm just back from holidays, missed that one. What is the future of that facility, and does that 90% and 100% targets in 2035 and 2045 just assume renewables, or will nuclear come back in some form in SMRs or something?
Right. So California constructed 5 nuclear plants. 4 of them got decommissioned. The last one is Diablo Canyon, which did get extended for a period of time. Not yet clear how long, in actuality, that will continue to run, but that is our largest operating power plant in the state of California today. Beyond that, it is still illegal to construct new nuclear power facilities in California until there is a solution for the waste, and there's not a permanent solution for that. And so no nuclear power plants have been built in California since the 1980s. And so what is happening right now in the power markets is that energy storage and solar are winning, and it's not close. These are technologies that are very, very cheap and can be built very, very fast. I mean, you know, there's only been 2 nuclear plants built in the United States this century. That's Watts-Bar in Tennessee and Vogtle 2 and 3 in Georgia. And Vogtle took 17 years to construct, cost $37 billion. It's the single most expensive power plant in the United States. And so there is, those are things that uh, definitely have some concerns in terms of getting capacity on quickly. Um, and then you're having to contend with, nuclear waste. Now, the future of that with SMRs and so on, I think remains to be seen and how that works out. But I'll just tell you the momentum right now in the United States and in California for new capacity is with solar and storage. I'll just close with one little example of that. This facility I just mentioned, the largest battery project in the world, which is now being built. It's called Darden, and that's a $5.5 billion, 4.6 gigawatt hour project. That company that's building that solar and storage facility just got bought by Google. And basically, Google paid 3 times more to buy that company than they did for YouTube. And they're investing, for their energy certainty for data centers and so on in solar and storage because it is the fastest and the most economic way to get new capacity.
Okay. So tell us about a grid then that reaches 90% clean energy, 100% clean energy sounds like it's going to be pretty much all renewables. Managing that's a lot of solar, a lot of storage. You're already in, say, 33% storage share, I think, in the evening peaks and things like that. Can it power the world's 4th largest economy?
Yeah, and by the way, I would say it's already sort of happening. We're at, as I mentioned, about 70% clean energy on the grid. We have had in the last 2 years, the hottest temperatures in the history of the state, highest electric demand in the history of the state, and we've not had any reliability issues. Not only has the grid not gone down, but we issue a signal called Flex Alert when we're getting close to an outage. We haven't issued a Flex Alert in 3 years, and that's really because of energy storage. So I think the other thing that we're doing a lot of, and we really want to lean into, is this philosophy of making sure that everything that connects to the grid is a good citizen of the grid. And so when you're doing, fleet charging or your heat pump is cycling, those are things that there's some flexibility in, not even necessarily whether you're powering them, but at what rate you're powering them. And so we're seeing a lot more of this come along. We just electrified the entire school bus fleet for the city of Oakland. It's the first major city in North America to electrify all of its school buses. So 74 buses, 74 chargers, all the kids going to school, get dropped off. Then the buses come back and they have a bunch of surplus capacity. They're plugged in at 4 o'clock, which is when our grid starts to need power as solar is going down, and the power from those buses gets fed back onto the grid, and the school gets paid for that, right? And so that's the kind of thing I think we're going to see a lot more of.
Can I ask David about demand growth? If I turn again to California, to Texas, it's had this absolutely massive amount of demand growth in recent years, which is also projected to continue. You've got around San Francisco, all your big AI companies, the programmers, but the data centers themselves are not necessarily at the moment. How do you think about demand growth?
Yeah, so right now in the United States, most of the new data centers are going in the Texas, Oklahoma area. We're still building some in California, and we do project that's going to be a source of growing load, but we project about twice as much energy demand from electric vehicles, for example, than we do from data centers. And because, as I mentioned, we're adding 1,200 EVs a day, and we're doing a lot to promote that. So there will be growth from data centers. I think the long-term answer, we're not totally sure with data centers, what that demand will really look like. If quantum computing really comes to fruition, that's a huge reduction in data center energy demand, but not clear if that's going to materialize or not. So without that, there's one projection I've seen that data centers could constitute half of global electric demand by mid-century. But again, that depends on a bunch of other factors. But we're monitoring that closely and working with all the companies in California.
But do you see the data center builders looking at California in the same way that they've been looking at, I don't know, West Virginia or Oklahoma or Texas?
So we're projecting, I think, maybe 5 gigs of new capacity for data centers in the coming years. And obviously, we have some of the big companies here, doing some of that. But there is more data center growth, as I mentioned, in places like Oklahoma and Texas than there is in California right now.
And on the transmission side of things, I mean, California is still, well, firstly, let me ask, have you had to build much new transmission to accommodate the change in supply mix?
Yeah, we put $22.5 billion into new transmission capacity in the last 4 years, and that's been a big investment for us. And we need to do both things. We need local power, rooftop power, energy storage, and transmission. And the governor just signed a very, very important bill in September of last year that moves us towards a regional grid. And, that's a good thing. You want a grid that is larger than the weather, so we can rely on solar, from another state, or wind or hydro or battery storage, and vice versa. And that is actually really important. So you need transmission, for that to work. And so, but that's a good thing, and that will actually save everybody money. It's much more economic to have a larger system of shared resources.
We're just about to wrap up, David. Just tell us about the electric vehicle uptake. It's 1,500 per day. I think it seems extraordinary. Is there any sign that that's slowing down or speeding up, or what's? And do you have any forecasts in terms of?
Well, look, I think that Trump's war in Iran, which I think is a colossal mistake, I think that is going to undermine his war on renewables and electric vehicles, because gasoline prices are spiking. Yesterday I was on, meeting with the Governor Newsom and our team. I mean, we're at $116 a barrel of oil in the U.S. And this is precisely the kind of price shock that reveals the vulnerability of relying on volatile fossil fuel markets. And I think that is yet another reason to go electric. And so I think that the bottom line is that Trump is capable of slowing but not stopping the energy transition. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And the experience of getting an electric car and driving one, and I've driven one now for 8 years, okay, and I drive it hard. I have 100,000 miles in my car. The only service I've had to do to my electric car, I drive a Chevy Bolt, is to change the tires, which I did 3 months ago. That's it, right? There's no air filter and oil change and spark plugs and the other servicing. So
No, there's got to be the windscreen wiper liquid, surely.
yeah, exactly. Even that.
And the heavier cars use up the suspension, I suspect, faster. But owning two of them,
It's like you have 7 moving parts in an electric drivetrain. You have 250 in a conventional. And so the maintenance cost for most people is just a huge benefit. And so what happens is, effectively, it's like a one-way valve. I don't know anybody who's bought an electric car and driving an electric car and wants to go back, right? Mostly the experience is really good. So as these cars get out there, we've seen that. And one other thing we're doing, which is I think really helping, is we have these big rideshare companies, Uber and Lyft. We're collecting a 9-cent fee, okay, on every one of those rides, no matter what kind of car it is. That goes into a pool of funding that then the drivers can use to convert to go electric. So about 1 out of every 5 Ubers in California today is electric. And that's important because about 5 times more miles are driven by an Uber driver than a regular driver. And so we're getting a lot more electric miles driven. So we're getting there. I am really jealous of China at 60% of their new vehicles.
David. Just to ask, on California used to have a ZEV policy, but I'm not sure where that is now. And also, I guess we've always seen that charging infrastructure is a kind of fear barrier that has to be overcome. For greed is one thing, and fear is another. I'm thinking about things like apartment buildings and stuff like that, and just tell us about how you're thinking about the overall policy and infrastructure support that there is for EVs.
Well, the state goal remains, which is to get 100% zero emission vehicles, new vehicle sales by 2035. Trump has kind of removed, there were carrots and sticks, and the sticks have been removed. So it's really carrots. And we are putting a huge amount of money into exactly what you're talking about, which is charging infrastructure. We have big charging companies, Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, Iona, and now, most importantly, actually, the Tesla network has now opened their network so every non-Tesla electric vehicle can use Tesla chargers. And I got to say, despite all of Elon's drama, that network is spectacular and it's really well sited. Yep, and it's fast, it's very reliable, and so the ability of people who are not driving Teslas, but are driving other electric cars to use that network now, and that's, really in the last few months that's been completed. That's helping a lot. And then we're just requiring chargers in all these other sites. We're putting them around airports. We're making the experience really friction-free. You don't ever worry in your house, oh, where am I going to find electricity to charge my phone? Because electricity is already, it's ubiquitous in the built environment. And that's the goal with EV chargers. We want to make it friction-free and easy to charge. And we're going to get there. And I just want to say, what Norway is doing right now, they're at 98% of new vehicle sales being electric. You walk around downtown Oslo, it's completely quiet because everything's electric. That is a postcard from the future for the rest of the world. EVs, despite Trump, EV growth continues around the world. And, it is going to scale. We're going to be hampered at the rate of growth, but long-term, I'm quite confident we're going to win. And by the way, just one thing I'll just close on. Before I came to Australia on Friday, I went to the Tesla electric semi-truck factory, okay? This is a $4 billion factory in Nevada that's going to open in July of this year. They're going to make 50,000 electric semi-trucks a year, 500-mile or 800-kilometer range. They can recharge in 35 minutes.
David, I just wrote a long note, a very popular note about 100% electrification of our Sydney to Melbourne with semis, possibly because we've got like Windrose, a Chinese company that arguably is going to do just as good a job as the Tesla Semi. But it's great to have the competition and the mega chargers, the megawatt charging standard and stuff. There's so much to do, isn't there? And it's great to see the progress.
There sure is. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. David, look, I'd love to talk more, but you've got a busy schedule, and we do thank you for allocating time to join us on the Energy Insiders podcast, and hope you enjoy the rest of the trip, and you're to change the government back in the US.
Change the president.
No, we'll get there. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, David. It was very, very informative.
And it was David Hochschild, the chair of the California Energy Commission, and we'll be back after this break.
G'day, Alex Carey here, proud ambassador for GoodWe. The GoodWe ESA 3060 all-in-one commercial solution is available now from GoodWe wholesalers. With a massive 50 kilowatt hours of the battery eligible for the federal rebate, it's the perfect solution for small businesses. The commercial energy storage range from GoodWe is growing, with more models launching soon. Visit goodwe.com.au for more information or contact the local GoodWe team.
Energy Networks Australia invites you to be in the room where the future of energy networks is being shaped. Join us at the Energy Networks Conference and Exhibition 2026, March 17 to 19 at the Adelaide Convention Centre. EN26 brings together over 1,250 industry leaders, decision makers, and innovators for 3 days of big conversations. From infrastructure delivery and system resilience to market reform, emerging technology, and of course, trust, communities, and an energy transition that serves all. If you work in energy, this is the event you can't afford to miss. Register now at www.energynetworksconference.com.au.
You are listening to the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles Parkinson and David Leitch. David, I thought the other David was very interesting.
No, it was a great speech. It's clear there's no great love lost between the Democrats and the Republicans, and
why wouldn't it be?
You could argue it was a fairly partisan approach, but it was very knowledgeable, and it's great to hear how well California is doing. I think, Giles, when we come to Australia, there's a few bits and pieces to talk about, which we'll get to, but really, if you're in the markets, what you're really interested in understanding is with all these oil shortages going on, and we could talk about that in electric vehicles, but you don't want to sound too much like I told you so, because no one loves that, but we told you so. But the thing is, that the gas price internationally, that's LNG, not automobile gas, has gone up like a rocket, but the gas price in Australia has barely moved. In fact, it's very soft. Electricity prices in the spot market are very soft, incredibly low at the moment for this time of the year. Like, in Victoria, I think the other day they were $30 or $40 a megawatt hour all day and night and for a few days. But the futures for June has jumped up 20%. in New South Wales in the last week. So it's just interesting to understand whether we're going to get a recurrence of what we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine and all these prices went right through the roof, or whether, in fact, because our renewables penetration, which is up to basically 50% for just about 12 months now, together with the fact that we've got batteries competing much harder in the peak market, means that, in fact, the futures could have got a bit ahead of themselves.
Well, they might well have, but maybe in New South Wales there's a feeling that there's some coal plants which could trip and go offline. They are the most heavily dependent on coal-fired generation, and they have to resort to gas generators, and possibly the lack of competition is driving that. It's interesting to note that the Victoria regulator is flagging a reduction in retail bills for households and businesses, and primarily due to the fall in wholesale prices thanks to renewables. Who knew?
And Charles, just on that, we get these endless stupid arguments from people who might look good in front of a camera and speak well like a certain Matt Canavan.
Mr. Cole.
But in fact, electricity prices have not gone up by more than inflation, more or less, in the past 10 years. They've gone up at about the same rate. Insurance costs have gone up 70% more than inflation. What was I shouldn't ask you what your insurance bill was, but I bet it wasn't zero.
No, it has gone up, yes. We just had to scrape a few pennies together to pay for it just last month, actually. Yes, well, Mr. Canavan is now Mr. Cole, head of the National Party, which is quite extraordinary, given he is the driver behind the coalition, or credited with being the driver behind the push against net zero. He clearly doesn't like renewables. He doesn't even like the home battery support scheme. He doesn't like renewable.
And he doesn't like One Nation. And I think, I wouldn't
mind betting that if he had the opportunity, he'd probably go into coalition with them. So
I think in the battle for the right side of politics, he's the person, right? Because he can distinguish the National Party clearly from One Nation in a way that we shouldn't stray onto politics, should we? But his chances of actually helping the coalition win back power at a federal level, not all that good.
Not all that good, yeah. And just to point out David Littleproud, I just thought his comments were quite telling. He's had too much. So he's going to go to the backbench and, as he said, lop a few brigades and drink lots of beer. But my suggestion is he just goes down to the pub and do that. And why waste a position in Parliament if that's his attitude?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. We're here for a good time, not for a long time.
And just on the fossil fuel things, of course, Gina Reinhardt, who hates renewables, thinks they don't work, thinks they'll never work. Her main lithium investment, which is ironic in itself because it's investing in the future of batteries and electric vehicles and things like that. Liontown Resources announced today that they had an 82% renewable share over the last 6 months, and they're asked about the sort of the threat of the rising cost of diesel on its operation. They said, well, we're 80% renewable. We don't care. It's protecting us from these fossil fuel price rises. So it's a delicious irony. It's a delicious irony.
Look, Charles, if you go right back to the original reason for putting wind and solar in, the reason why so many households way back when put rooftop solar in is because you fix your price. You avoid this exposure to coal and oil and gas prices. The reason you and I and everyone else that owns an EV is laughing all the time now is because we could not give a rat's. You put solar and a battery in, you just don't give a rat's about the whole thing. It's a joke. And Australia has this opportunity to do so much more. I read today in the Financial Review that the government's changed the funding for its heavy transport program. Now, I can understand that if it's taking it away from hydrogen, but this opportunity in heavy transport, there's there's a freight forward event in Canberra on March the 30th. And in Parliament, that really is a great opportunity to show what we can do in heavy road transport. I mean, it is a real problem when people in the outback can't get food, can't deliver their produce to markets because there's not enough diesel. And we have a terrible problem with that. And you and I, and quite anyone else, has been rabbiting on for years about Australia's oil dependency and what a security risk it is, I must say I didn't think it was going to be the Straits of Hormuz that would make the problem so clear, but it has. It's made it very, very clear.
Yeah. Well, you and Donald Trump didn't think about Straits of Hormuz. And I meant that in the nicest way, David.
But I wasn't going to go and bomb the shit out of it. Excuse me.
Fair enough. Look, there's actually been a lot of interest. I'll just point out that I thought Energy Minister Chris Bowen made a really good point. He was speaking at the same event that David Hochschild was, and just was saying that, you can't interrupt the flow of wind and solar, but you certainly can interrupt the flow of fossil fuels. And we're now seeing him sort of take a few sort of dramatic measures, allowing dirtier fuel to be produced to sort of fill in that supply problem, probably caused by panic buying out in the regions, probably inflated in turn by some of the conservative media and the politicians.
Well, Charles, I just want to finish on this because I think it is so important. I really do. There's a budget coming up. Now, if we were in Ukraine and Russia was invading Ukraine, do you think we'd be talking about the budget and how it's a big problem and we can't afford to give any soldiers weapons? Australia has a massive opportunity. The will of the people, I would argue, is very strongly at the moment in favour of reducing our dependence on diesel and oil. And now is the time to be going harder, not softer on it. Where the government's got, the rest of this term and very, very likely next term. They can't afford to stuff around and be conservative. They've got to go hard on decarbonisation.
No, absolutely, yeah. Hey, look, there's been a lot of interest in electric trucks, particularly after your interview with Daniel Bleakley a couple of weeks ago. There's been
Wasn't he good?
There. It was really good, and driven by also this sort of fossil fuel crisis that in the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf and what have you. We did actually have a reader comment. Love the program, says Trevor. A couple of things you didn't mention were the reduced noise and also the safety aspect with regeneration not wearing out the brakes. We have a huge problem in South Australia with a steep descent into Adelaide and with trucks losing their brakes. This shouldn't happen with electric trucks because they use regeneration, and you would never have a problem with the Jake brakes making a huge amount of noise in the middle of the night and the motors at maximum power climbing steep hills, keeping people awake.
I agree with that. I do think it's a first world problem, but I do agree.
Yeah, well, look, it is part of the general mix. I mean, anyone who's driven an EV, as David Hochschild said, doesn't really want to go back to fossil fuels, and you'll find the same with truck drivers as well. And I quite like the phrase that Daniel used in a separate interview he did with the Driven podcast a month or so ago, talking about the first trials, or one of the first trials going from Wollongong to Sydney up that steep hill. And there was this sort of the B doubles sort of struggling up the hill in God knows what gear, sort of going about 20 kilometres an hour, and the Windrose truck just went past at about 80 kilometres an hour up the hill. And the guy was on his two-way radio going, "What the fuck was that?" And they even got pulled over, I think, because...
As we discussed last week, Charles, Now, what else have we got to talk about this week?
Not much. Data centres. Data centres, rules come out from the AEMC saying that they must not trip off. They've got to work harder to stay online. And that's all about sort of not doing some sort of random sort of withdrawing of load. So there's, and this is potentially a major issue. We've seen that in the US.
Well, it would be if we had any data centres. I mean...
Well, we're about to have some, presumably.
Are we? Are we? We can't even have a climate model, apparently, because, and they... I read that there's a lot of scientists getting taken out at CSIRO who worked on our own domestic climate model. But since I don't know too much about that, I won't say any more other than to observe that I read that. I also read that the government's recharging sort of program, or EV charging, has come under higher costs than expected. Jeez, I had to have a Valium after I read that.
Yes, well, that was particularly the part that was rolled out by NRMA, and that doesn't seem to have been an entirely great success, as anyone who's tried to sort of plug into a NRMA charger may have found.
And I think we really need to look forward on the charging side of things. There's far too much emphasis on 50 kilowatts as if that's a good solution. You and I know that all the new cars coming out tend to have bigger rather than smaller batteries. They tend to have 800 volt architecture. They're quite often capable of charging at 300 or 400 kilowatts. I don't think there's a 400 kilowatt charger in Australia. And so, 50
That's
kilowatts...
rolled out by Tesla, the V4 things.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we need more powerful chargers, as well as just more chargers, as well as chargers for people that live in apartment buildings and chargers on the streets. We just need a lot more charging infrastructure. And again, it's another one of those things taking away the fear. It's the fear that people have that they range anxiety. And if we can take that fear away, because there's chargers everywhere they look, EVs will go and sell.
Yeah. I think we've sort of, I've tried to redescribe it as from range anxiety to charger anxiety. And that's a major problem. I mean, that's a fundamental problem with the infrastructure that was rolled out, which was not good enough. It seemed exciting at the time, but it didn't last. Anyway, David, what else is happening? The few things happening in the planning department. Queensland's called in yet another big battery project, so they're just not helping things at all.
They're going to be so sorry. They're increasing their exposure to fossil fuels. Hey, how's it good? How good's it looking building more gas just at the moment, eh?
Yeah, well, I think most of their gas fields are underwater at the moment because of flooding,
which I wrote about.
Which you wrote about. You did indeed. In fact, it was a very good piece and stoked a bit of controversy on well, not controversy, there was just the naysayers, the inevitable naysayers on LinkedIn, who I'm starting to think might actually be artificial bots, but possibly not. Next week, I'm off to the Energy Networks conference in Adelaide, which should be interesting, I think, because Networks got a lot to think about in terms of their future, their structure, how they engage. They would desperately like to sort of break out and do more engagement on the consumer levels, and there's a whole lot of people who think that's a really bad idea and it shouldn't be allowed. So
the AEMC could think harder about a more fundamental look at the role of networks and the revenue that they earn. I mean, we've discussed this a little bit, but the question in my mind from a finance perspective is that the networks earn a return on equity. Now, it's adjusted for this thing called beta, which is a measure of risk. But I think when you actually go out there and observe it, the actual underlying risk that the networks have is very low at the moment. And so if consumers are going to be putting less energy through the network, it's not just, and we're talking about how to slice the cake, whether it's people who stop using it should have to pay more and put more of the burden on low-income earners or not. I think that the network owners have to take some of the pain as well. They can't just be entitled to a fixed amount of revenue every single year, come hell, heaven or high water. They have to bear some risk if they're getting an equity return. Now, if they were just getting a debt return, that would be another story.
Yeah, that's the financial part of it, and I understand all that. I think one of the fundamental problems is, and it's a difficult one to address, is that we've kind of done that sort of vertical integration in the wrong way. We've paired generators with retailers when we probably should have paired retailers with network companies because they deliver the power to the consumer, so why shouldn't they engage with them on the bills and prices and things like that? They're unable to do that now, and I don't know how you unscramble that egg. So
no, that's right. And I mean, amongst the other negatives of it, and we're running to the end of time, people don't care, but there's two complete IT systems that have to be maintained. The network's point of view, which just looks at it as a connection point, and the retailer's point of view, which looks at you as Mr. Giles Parkinson, and wouldn't you like some nice electricity?
Okay, David, we should wrap this up. Before we do go, I do want to point out to a couple of really interesting interviews on some of our other podcasts. The Driven podcast had a look at the NVES results for the first year, and there's some interesting results there. Also, the recent spike in sales in February and the growth of some of the new Chinese models, particularly Geely and Zeekr. Solar Insiders got another interesting interview with about neighbourhood batteries and their role in regional grids, and the Switch on Australia podcast has got this really interesting discussion with Gavin Duffy from the St Vincent de Paul Society about the benefits or otherwise of rooftop solar battery storage and sort of the incentives that go with that. And anybody who's interested in that issue, I do suggest you listen to that, or do recommend you listen to that, because Anne has sort of pressed Gavin Duffy on that, and it's a really interesting discussion. Anyway, we have more episodes of the Energy Insiders podcast to come next week, David. So thank you very much. Thank you to David Hochschild from the California Energy Commission for making himself available, and a really interesting and positive discussion that we had.
Isn't it nice when you can just pass a rule that says you have to have X% and, we've just passed another rule that says we'll spend $25 billion on transmission. Life's so easy in California, isn't it, really?
Right, yeah. And utilities, if they don't meet their target, they pay a penalty. It's pretty simple, really. Just how to motivate people. Ah, dear. We have much to learn, but so does California. But there you go. Anyway, that was a good discussion. We'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week. Thanks very much to our sponsors, Evergen and Pylon. And that's all for now. Goodbye.
Energy Insiders was brought to you by Evergen, the market-leading renewable energy software business that optimises residential and commercial solar and battery systems. Evergen enables large numbers of systems to operate as a single fleet, so network operators can use them as a virtual power plant, generating significant value for consumers, network operators, and the energy system as a whole. Evergen software is powering the energy system of the future. Energy Insiders was also brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly cost and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.